It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. Israel-Hamas conflict. It's topical and it starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight, among them our guests as well. Good to have them on the program. Looking forward to getting their questions to our guests in a short while. Many are gripped by rugby fever here in South Africa, but a lot of the world's attention is on the Hamas-Israel conflict. Thousands of people dead, thousands displaced, several thousands injured. There's been calls for an immediate and unconditional opening of humanitarian corridors. President Cyril Ramaphosa saying it's vital that all those who require urgent humanitarian assistance are provided with the basic life-supporting necessities and that human suffering is ameliorated. Question: is there an intertwined fate, F-A-T-E, of these two people? Tonight, our aim is to bring as many perspectives as possible on these matters. Why? Because it allows you and your family to make up your own mind as to what's the best possible solution to the situation in the Middle East. We are not here to play sides. That's not the job. Our job is to give you the facts as we know it and give you context. It's a tough job, right? Given this current state of play. But we choose the vocation, so we will do it. And because there's an understanding here that facts are only relevant in the context of humanity. There's a lot of disagreement as to who's right and who's wrong, who has the moral high ground and who doesn't. But one thing's for certain, there's pain on both sides. So let's use that as a springboard to get to understand what's at stake here. But more importantly, to put purpose to pain and to look for avenues of opportunity that this region can take advantage of on the road to durable peace. Which leads us to the question of the week. And we ask you, what do you think needs to be done to avert the looming humanitarian crisis amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict? Let's walk and talk. As always, it's a simple question, but the answers couldn't be more complicated, right? How can peace be achieved in the Middle East? We've been asking this for decades. Often the simplest questions come with complex answers. How can a just and fair solution be reached? And what role can countries like South Africa play in finding this solution? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, let's get you context. And as always, we're going to turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. The United Nations Secretary General said on Friday that the attacks by Hamas on Israel killed more than 1,200 people and injured thousands more since last Saturday. And this was followed by intense bombardment of Gaza that has already killed over 1,800 people and injured thousands more. These figures are changing as the days progress. Let me bring in my guest tonight to help me unpack this. SABC News International Foreign Editor, Sophie Mokoena. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Good to have you on the program. Let's break it down for the viewers. What we know and why it matters. Context, always important. So, map of Israel, right? We know back in 2006, there was elections. Then what followed immediately was fighting between Hamas and Fatah.
Yes.
At the end of the day, Hamas controls Gaza, the Palestinian Authority controls the West Bank. Fast forward to today, but important to look at the long lens of history. How did we get to this point?
We know that it is a long, protracted conflict where Palestine and Israel couldn't implement the agreements that were reached for many years to ensure that these two nations live side by side. You know the 1917 Balfour Declaration, where there was an agreement to share the land, but that was not implemented. And then the 1948 modern Israel state was formed, and we know that there was a war, and that war led to more tension. And we know that the Palestinians were not happy. In fact, many people are saying all these negotiations, the Palestinians are continuously being shortchanged. And here we are today.
Yeah.
They say enough is enough, and they want movement. And here we are sitting with a conflict that has intensified. And let us be clear, it didn't start that Saturday.
Correct.
Where people were killed at that concert. It was a build-up. Perhaps the media hasn't been covering the build-up properly because there's so much happening around the world. And that is why Dr. Naledi Pandor last year warned leaders of the world that you are now focused on Ukraine, but a mess is developing in the Middle East. And here we are today.
So, following that, in terms of the build-up, questions now being asked about Israel's intelligence. Did they see this coming? What did America know, for instance, as well? What are we learning?
We heard that Egypt did give information, but Israel has denied those reports. We are told also that it looks like the intelligence in the United States of America had some information. So it is very difficult to verify that information, particularly when Israel is saying there is no such. But there are reports that there was information that was given to some people in Israel, but they didn't act. You know that Israel, internally, they are having lots of challenges, those constitutional changes that are being pushed by the current government, and we saw people taken to the streets, thousands of Israelis, and even some structures of government, the democratic structures in that country, people taking sides because they were not happy. Perhaps that internal challenge led to a situation where Israel was relaxed. But they are denying.
This is one of the sore points that everybody's talking about in terms of the electricity, food, and fuel blockade in Gaza. What do we know with regards to this? How bad is the situation?
A terrible situation there. The Secretary General of the United Nations on Friday, he had an emergency meeting of the Security Council. He had two briefings on that day. Thursday also another briefing talking about that crisis. I mean, it's horrible. No electricity, no food coming in, water. But one thing that I think it's going to be a real blight on Israel is the bombardment landed in some hospital. And you know that that's a war crime.
So it leads us to this looming humanitarian crisis. We know that Israel has asked more than 1 million people to flee south, right? There's about 1.1 million people here. Gaza has about 2 million people in total, right? The United Nations has come up and said, hang on, do you want all those people to go through this in a so-called war zone? Sometimes, in many cases, it's almost near impossible. What do we know at this stage in terms of the movement?
Very few people are indeed heeding the call, but some of them are being killed on their way to the south. And now the two sides are pointing fingers at each other. Israel is saying Hamas is attacking those who are living so that it instills fear. And Hamas is saying, no, it is Israel. And we know that the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has condemned in strongest terms Hamas and the action thereof, that led to the killing of thousands of people on that Saturday fateful morning. This time around, he was very harsh to say the instruction by the Israel Defense Force that people must move is not reasonable. It is impossible. The World Health Organization Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus, said the same thing, even lamenting that the situation is already horrible in relation to health services. So maybe those harsh words and many people making noise, putting spotlight on Israel. Because remember, on Saturday when the incident happened, many people around the world sympathized with Israel. But the narrative is changing, and it is important for Israel to realize that the more you get aggressive, you undo what you have done in terms of people who are sympathizing with Israel because of that incident on Saturday. Because when people see those visuals, we have them, we beam them every day, the frustration, and just imagine saying people must move, and there's no humanitarian corridor.
Well, that becomes an important point. Now, with neighboring countries such as Egypt, the Rafah border crossing becomes very crucial, isn't it? I was listening to the World Food Programme regional director says that they have about 1.3 food for about 1.3 million. It's sitting at the border. The Foreign Affairs Minister of Egypt saying that this other side into Gaza at the border crossing is inoperable because of the damage there on that side. So where's the solution here?
Well, Egypt is clear. They are not going to allow that passage because they know very well that this is a strategy. Those Palestinians who are going to leave their land and their houses and move to neighboring countries, chances of them going back to their land, it's nil. It has been happening for years. Instead, it will be smaller and smaller, that piece of land. And Egypt is saying, we are not going to allow that. Two, Egypt is saying, if you want the passage, allow the humanitarian corridor. We have thousands and thousands of trucks waiting to deliver food and all the necessities to Gaza. You don't want us to give ordinary civilians help, but you want us to help your citizens to be evacuated. That passage, it's not for Palestinians. It's more of the foreign nationals who are there, who are supposed to leave that area that is engulfed in war. And therefore, Egypt strategically is saying, let's agree. We open the passage, you allow the humanitarian corridor. That has been requested by the world body, the credible world body, the very same world body that Benjamin Netanyahu addressed recently during the UNGA.
And many states have been requested to give aid, South Africa included. We heard the president speaking about that, talking about that, and he says government is processing that. So we'll see how that unfolds over the next couple of days. I want to have a look at this now as we conclude, Sophie, with regards to where to next. Is this still a viable option at this stage in the game?
The two-state solution is dead. It's dead. Both sides are saying that. And the noise from international community, it's not going to work. The two nations are saying the two-state solution is dead. We spoke to the ambassador of Palestine on Friday. I asked her a question about this two-state solution. She said it's dead. And the same with the other side. And therefore, the Palestinians and those who are supporting the Palestine cause are saying you have to start from scratch because all these negotiations, actually, Palestinians were shortchanged.
Sophie, thank you very much indeed. It's a complicated matter, no doubt. Thank you to you and your team for keeping on top of things. Sophie Mokoena is SABC News International Editor. Look, Israel has vowed to annihilate Hamas in retaliation for its unprecedented attacks against what they say is civilians as well. Israel says about 1,300 people were killed in an unexpected, the term onslaught being used. It's responded by subjecting Gaza to the most intense bombardment it has ever seen, putting the small enclave under total siege and destroying much of its infrastructure. Take a look.
just like to warn you that we may have red alerts going off here any moment now. I just heard some very loud booms in the distance that would potentially be the Iron Dome intercepting rockets.
This is Israel's 9/11. This is Israel's 9/11.
Israel has bombarded the Hamas-run Gaza Strip with unprecedented airstrikes after Hamas fighters stormed through Israeli towns a week ago, gunning down civilians and taking scores of hostages.
I've been in two wars in my life and never seen anything like this. Bodies all places for the slaughter.
We have been notified that 2 South African nationals have died in this ongoing conflict between Palestine and Israel.
Today we are facing a great humanitarian, a very dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Carrying mattresses and personal belongings, residents of Gaza City were seen walking south on Friday after Israel ordered more than 1 million people to leave the northern half of the Gaza Strip within 24 hours.
The health system is on the brink of collapse. Morgues are overflowing. 11 healthcare staff have been killed while on duty.
The flood of people arriving in the south has stretched resources that were already strained to a breaking point.
States has Israel's back, and we're going to be working on this all through today and beyond.
We've called on the international community, the United Nations, and all other concerned international bodies to make sure that peace is installed in Palestine and that the Israeli government is directed at withdrawing this command of getting people out of the northern part of Gaza.
All right, many thanks to its topical producers for that montage. We've got limited time. Let's get straight into our discussions. What does the immediate future hold for Israel as well as Palestine? And given the historical context, what can we learn in terms of solutions? My guest tonight, Professor Farid Esack, board member of Africa for Palestine. Thank you very much indeed. Klaas Mokgomole, head coordinator at Africans for Peace. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Genya, project manager at Doctors Without Borders, and virtually we have Dr. Imtiaz, Sooliman, founder chair of Gift of the Givers. We also have our digital audience. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Maybe I can start with Dr. Sooliman first. Doc, your organization has had a presence in that region for about 14 years now. We know that movement is an issue, security is an issue. What is your team learning at this hour?
Sorry, Blake.
Oops. Dr. Sooliman, can you hear me? All right, it seems that we are having a bit of an issue with Dr. Sooliman. We'll try to pick it up with him in a short while. Professor Esack, maybe I can start with you then. When you hear what has been said in terms of the build-up to this, it's been a week, thousands killed. Where do you see the solution here?
Well, the one is the question of the build-up. The build-up hasn't happened over the week. The build-up has been happening for more than 2 decades. As for where do things go from here, that really entirely depends on the quote-unquote international community, and it is in a much smaller measure being determined by the Palestinian people themselves. I do think that the crisis at the moment is essentially a humanitarian crisis, and it must be addressed at that level. And at the same time, any response that is limited to the humanitarian will really tantamount to sprinkling some perfume over a heap of cow dung in the hope of that the smell will disappear. Just not going to do anything to seriously advance justice and peace in that part of the world.
Monica, what's your team learning on the ground in terms of access to the affected areas?
Well, we are finding it very hard to access our patients. We have 300 colleagues in Gaza, and we're not sure as to the safety of all of them at this time. Some of them have been able to go into the south. Our international staff are in the south, and we are seeing that access is a huge problem, and this has to be addressed immediately.
Yeah. The only viable way, possibly at this stage, from what we're picking up from reports, is through that Rafah border. Take us behind the scenes in terms of how do you get in there with safe passage? Who do you negotiate, given this current state of play?
Well, at the moment, we're finding it really hard to negotiate any kind of safe passage for anyone. And we have been calling for the Rafah border crossing to be open so that we can see to the safety of our patients, get proper evacuation routes so people can flee to safety if they choose to, and we can get some medical supplies in so that we can access the patients who need it the most.
Klaas, your assessment of what has happened over the last week or so. Death on both sides.
Yeah, of course.
People are hurting. What needs to happen now in order to mitigate, in order to ameliorate the situation?
I think what needs to happen now is to get Hamas to drop the weapons. We need to start at that point. If we get Hamas to be able to drop the weapons and be willing to negotiate, I think Israel has offered itself in the past to negotiate, and we haven't seen that from the part of Hamas. And we need to address Hamas maybe at a level of a terrorist organization. But because in this conflict, we always look at it as a political organization. But if we address Hamas as a terrorist organization, then we can get to understand who we're negotiating with. But we get them to drop their weapons, then we can start the negotiations.
What are we negotiating here? Is it land? Is it control? What are we talking about?
Of course, while we negotiate, we need to negotiate a way forward, which involves the land, which involves the leaders, which involves how parties are going to operate. I think the parties on their own, they will decide what's going to work for them. People always negotiated 2 states, or some are saying 1 state, some are saying maybe 3 states would work, considering that the West Bank and Gaza are in 2 different spaces. But what needs to work here is for the parties to get together on a table and negotiate and come up with a solution for themselves. What happened in South Africa in the Codex negotiations? No one came through with a suggestion. South Africans on their own sat and decided on what's going to work for themselves. And they came up with a solution that sort of benefited majority of the South Africans. Same thing can happen in the Middle East.
Prof, before I go to Dr. Sooliman, I mean, when you hear what Klaas is saying in terms of negotiation, and you heard what Sophie Mokoena was saying, is that some are saying the 2-state solution is dead at this stage. How do we kickstart this negotiation?
The 2-state solution is not just dead in terms of current developments, it has been dead for a long time. The only option for that part of the world is, if one wants to talk about a South African perspective of it, it is the creation of a non-racial society that is not based on ethnic chauvinism or nationalisms, but it is based on 1 person, 1 vote in a democratic society. I don't for the life of me see how any society can be divided on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity, not in the 21st century. And so the idea of a particular state for a particular bloodline crowd, it is just, apartheid wasn't good for South Africa. there's no reason why it should be good for that part of the Middle East.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Sooliman now. I hope your line is better. Doc, apologies for that. I was saying at the top, your organization has been in the region there, I understand, for about 14 years now. What is your team learning on the ground in terms of movement, in terms of security?
Hello, Glenn. It's not 40 years. It is since 2014, which is 9. In terms of security, the team it's the most difficult time they've ever had. We've been involved in 2009. We've been involved in 2004. We've been involved last year in 2002. We've been involved for the wars too. This nightmare, it's a we can't move around. Dangerous.
Doc, I do apologize. Maybe we need to redial you. I think it's a network issue. We're not getting a clear line to you, but okay, the team will work on it. We'll try to get back to you in a short while, Doc. Prof, I just wanted to ask with regards to if both Jews and Arab Muslims claim the land and it dates back many, many years, how do you get to a viable solution?
Well, it's not a question of Jews claiming the land and Arabs claiming the land. The truth is that there has been an uninterrupted Jewish presence throughout known history in that part of the land. But there's never been a sole Jewish claim to ownership of the land. And Palestinians have also got a claim to the land for an uninterrupted period. So one historical competition with another one, that's not the way out. The way out is that all people who inhabit that land must, with each other, find a way of living together in a shared land. A land for the Jews and a land for the Palestinians. This is not the way out. In the 21st century and in a world that we're struggling to create based on human rights and individual human rights, it is just not the way out.
Klaas, what do you make of the international community's reaction to what has been happening over the last week, in particular South Africa's reaction?
I think South Africa missed an opportunity when they chose a site. And I think our government, especially DECO, they are not treating Hamas for what it is. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And we need to look at what Hamas does. Hamas kills babies, Hamas gets into Israel and kills young people at a concert. By the way, liberal young people that are sort of opposed to some of the things the Israeli government is doing. Hamas is not conducting itself in a war manner. But when you look at Israel, it conducts itself in a war manner. Obviously, Israel follows. When you look at the monitoring of its military in Gaza, conducts itself in a proper manner. But South Africa, of course, decided to sort of side with Palestine because of political reasons since the time of Yasser Arafat and stuff like that. But I feel like South Africa could have played a mediator role and could have sort of brought the parties together, but they failed to do that. And it's not helping the situation at the moment.
Prof, when you hear the description of Hamas and what's been out there in terms of the media, I know some were disputing in terms of, the stories of the beheading of babies. That has been disputed in some quarters. What's your reaction to Klaas?
Well, I think that to reduce the problem of more than 70 years of occupation to a single Palestinian entity, I think it is just laughable, okay? Hamas is an entity that has existed now for the last 20-odd years or so, and the occupation of the Palestinian people long precedes the emergence of Hamas. As for the nature of Hamas, Hamas is not ISIS, Hamas is not Al-Qaeda, and I'm not an apologist for Hamas. I think that some of the scenes that we've seen has been absolutely vile, it has been despicable, and in the contestation for images and so on, if any of those images that are true, I have no truck with it whatsoever. At the same time, Hamas is Hamas won in the last Palestinian elections that there ever was, Hamas actually won more than 50% of the Palestinian people's vote. And so whether you hated the guts of the ANC or not, you had to negotiate with the ANC. And let us not reduce the history of our liberation struggle to 3 years of Codesa. We had an armed struggle, we had international solidarity throughout the world with the people of South Africa. Mandela didn't go to jail for organizing Sunday school picnics. Mandela went to jail because he was a terrorist. Mandela went to jail because he was found guilty of treason and terrorism. So let us not reduce the last 6-7 years of Mandela's life to Madiba and the ANC as this great record. No. Our nation went through an armed struggle. Many people got killed. We always empathize with human beings that get killed, okay? But let us not whitewash and think that our liberation struggle was all hunky-dory about people hugging each other. That's not the case.
Monica, I mean, you're hearing the debate with regards to politics and with regards to history and context. Important, no doubt. But your organization is involved, needs to get to the people. At the heart of this is people that are suffering on both sides. But how do you do that now, given that you're having this battle in terms of basically getting into Gaza at this stage?
Yes, and that's the problem. It's like the professor said, let's not reduce it to purely a humanitarian crisis, but for the moment, it is a humanitarian crisis. It's not looming, it's here. Our team spent the whole of today looking for safe drinking water for communities, for patients, for people who are trapped and at the mercy of people who will not allow them basic humanitarian needs. So the situation is dire and has to be addressed immediately. MSF is calling on the international community to bring negotiation, to bring pressure, so that we can have safe passage, safe corridors, humanitarian space for the people who need it in Gaza.
All right, Dr. Sooliman is with us via the telephone. Doc, I was asking with regards to what is your team currently seeing on the ground, what is needed in the affected areas?
Good evening, Blaine. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, Doc.
Well, just at the beginning from the clarification, we've not been there for 14 years. We've been there since 2014, doing multiple projects inside Gaza. But coming back to your question, my team said from the outset, they said this is an absolute massacre. It's an absolute genocide. It's totally inhumane. They can't move around anyway. Hospitals have been targeted and health centers, more than 20 of them. Civilian complexes have completely been flattened. Many people have lost, 47 families have lost everybody. Every single member of the family has died. There's nobody left in those 47 families. Water is shut, electricity doesn't work, there's no internet, there's no fuel. The hospitals, many of them are totally out of use, which means that the bulk of the patients have to go to a limited amount of hospitals. 23 medical personnel have been killed. 23 ambulances have been directly targeted. In the hospital itself, when the electricity doesn't work, those on life support got no chance of survival. There's no more place for the patients on the floor or on the bed or anywhere else. There's just no beds, ICU, everything is full in all the hospitals. Food is a challenge. 48 schools have been hit, and mosques have been hit. The road is basically unusable, the roads in Gaza. They've been very, very badly damaged. These are the challenges to move around. Now remember, whilst they're moving around, they've got their own families to consider, and to put additional emotional, psychological stress on them. But they're trying their best to move around. We've managed to purchase supplies, what's available inside Gaza. We've moved medical equipment, medicines, other medical supplies, consumables to various hospitals, but it's not easy. It takes lots of challenges, and it's very, very high risk. In fact, a few days ago, we actually told them, it was hard for me to tell them this, but I had to tell them we need to expand our labor force, we need to expand the networks, because there's a chance they could get killed. So it's very, very high risk moving around. And they get killed, what happens to the support of the people? They said they've already prepared for that. They brought in more people, and they appreciate the fact that they can get killed in the process. Then came the ridiculous suggestion by the IDF to move 1.1 million people in 24 hours. It's the most illogical, insensible, irrational suggestion to be ever made. How can you move 1.1 million people in 24 hours? There's not enough cars, there's not enough fuel, and where are they going to go to? The south is already full of people. Many of those people decided to stay behind and face whatever comes to them. They don't want to run anymore. They're tired of 75 years of occupation. Death is better than the ignominy and the terrible the challenges they're going through. And in fact, before the 24 hours, Israel then targeted... Sorry?
Go ahead, Doctor.
And in less than 24 hours, the Israeli military targeted these people that were moving, and 70 people died in one attack. And then, of course, water is a challenge. We've got our own desalination plants in the country. We have 3. They then, the electricity died, so we couldn't make them functional. We managed to get a generator. We managed to get some fuel, and we're providing water from those desalination plants. But you need to understand that everything is not next to each other.
Yeah.
Although it's not a big place. And you know, to move 50 meters when so many bombs are falling, they've dropped more bombs in 6 days than the amount of bombs that was dropped in the Gulf War in Iraq. So you can understand the challenges my teams have. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult.
Doctor, talk to us about your fears. If the people affected or those needing humanitarian aid don't get it within next week, what happens?
They're going to die. It's just a simple thing. They are going to die. You know, they're going to die in the hospitals. The injured people are going to die. The critically ill ones are going to die. The children are going to starve. They'll sit, in one place and sit in patience, waiting for something to happen. You know, an infection is going to come because the sewage systems are going to collapse. When there's no electricity to drive the pumps, the sewage system, that's going to cause infection. So there's a danger, a real danger of infection or from the decayed bodies. Now they have to take ice cream trucks, get fridges from the shops, and put bodies into the ice cream trucks and into the fridges of the shops because of the incessant bombing. They can't bury people. So, and if they run out of fridges, the infection is going to come from decomposed bodies. Together with that and the sewage, we're going to have a massive outbreak of disease, which is going to kill many, many people. And the people have made up their mind, by far and large, they're not going to leave Gaza. So you know what? They're going to stay there, and then the numbers of people going to die, it's just going to go to the roof. Already 2,500 have died, of which more than 50% are women and children. 9,000 have been injured. But the figures are probably much more because they can't get to the rubble. They can't get the people out of the rubble because if you go out, you get bombed in the process. So I think those figures are conservative figures because many people have not been reached in those concrete buildings. It's just too dangerous to try to take anybody out.
On that sobering note, Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, stay with us. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to our digital audience as well, get their take on how they see it. Next. What measures needs to be taken in order to lessen the looming humanitarian crisis as a result of the Israel-Hamas conflict? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. I want to get you our regular word on the street feature now. We took to the streets of Johannesburg seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this devastating topic. This is what people had to say. Take a look.
The international community, the world out there, we can find a solution to any problem for that matter. Human beings just need to talk. We need to develop that level of compassion. We need to develop that level of tolerance once again. And we need to sit down and chalk out the best way possible for all of us.
It's a serious issue. I think the governments should try and help and assist, find solutions. Maybe talk to other governments between the two, try to make reconciliation between the two countries. If you remember, the war has been happening for a very long time.
We are one. We should unite. We should unite and bring peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
You cannot say you want peace when you know that you took something from these people. Because this is an apartheid state. It's exactly like what South Africa was fighting for, and we achieved it.
We have to have the people in the world to try and get together and look at the problems in the Middle East in a way that doesn't take sides. And I'm just sad about that.
They're killing innocent people, children, taking people's homes, taking their lives for no reason at all, which is not right.
We have a very sound relationship with the people of Palestine.
you will recall the struggle, the Palestinian Liberation Organization with the relationship of the oppressed people of South Africa. So we can't say today, when you are in government, we will then be confused about who are the oppressed people in Palestine and Israel. There's no conflict there.
As always, we appreciate your thoughts on this program. Let's take it to our digital audience now and get their take. Let's start with Romy. Romy, welcome to the program. Your thoughts? Romy, if you could unmute. Let's try that. Okay, if you can just press unmute. Let's try one more time. There we go. Go ahead, Romy.
Hello?
Go ahead, Romy.
Hi, my name is Romy. I'm an Israeli South African, and I actually live about 2 kilometers from the Gaza border.
Mm-hmm.
My community has suffered immensely in this last onslaught, including the lives of 8 people who were murdered brutally in their homes. Another 4 people were taken hostage. I basically have no home to go back to in Kibbutz Kisufim. And I'm deeply distraught by the messages that I've been hearing of the fake news. There really aren't babies being beheaded. Civilians are being murdered. They're settlers. It's fake news. I've seen the videos with my own eyes for everyone to look at them with their own eyes. If you don't believe it, Google it. You will find what you're looking for.
Romy, thank you very much indeed for your comments. Humaira, let's get your take. What do you have to say about what Romy has just said now?
If I could just begin by responding to Romy and saying that Joe Biden himself denied the claims that 40 babies were beheaded. Moreover, we as South Africans owe it to Palestine to show our solidarity with them, to pledge allegiance to the Palestinian cause. Nelson Mandela himself said that we know all too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And I think now more than ever, South Africa needs to emphasize the need for a one-state solution amid all of this crisis, amid this occupation, not a conflict, but an occupation of Palestine by Israel. A conflict implies that the two parties are on equal footing. This is most certainly an occupation. Thank you.
Benji, let's get your take.
Can I respond? Do I have a moment to respond?
Romy, I'll come back to you now. Let me just get Benji. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the parts that we need missing here is that the South African government needs to peace as much as possible. One of the reasons that this was actually driven mostly by Iran was that Israel was on the brink of a deal with Saudi Arabia, which would have created peace for the first time between Arab people and Israel, assisted the Palestinians. Until we can remove these extremists from the equation, we're never going to be able to protect the civilians of Gaza from the tyrannical regime.
All right, Benji. Romy, let's get your response before we go to Rais. Romy, if you can unmute.
Yes, what I wanted to say is that 40 babies haven't been beheaded, but enough have. Maybe not 40. Is one enough for you? Is one baby beheaded enough for you, or do you want 40 babies beheaded? Additionally, the term occupation in Gaza, lie. Gaza blockade is in place because after 2005, when Gaza was released to the Palestinians, take this land, turn it into Singapore or into Dubai, what they turned it into was a terror hub. 2 years in, after Hamas was elected, not exactly democratically as well, quite a brutal regime that took over, they started shooting rockets into civilian areas in Israel. Let me remind you, the Hamas manifesto says, we do not believe in peaceful resolution of conflict. That's how it has been since 1988.
All right, Humaira, I know you want to respond. Just respond quickly, and then we go to Rais.
If I could just respond very quickly to Romy. The United Nations themselves state that all people under occupation are allowed the right to resist by any means necessary, including that of armed struggle. So branding Hamas as terrorists is very, very reductionist and very, very dismissive of the Palestinian cause. Like Prof. Farid Esack said earlier, Hamas is not the entire Palestinian resistance. Hamas does not make up for 75 years of Palestinian resistance. Yes, it's an organization that is resisting day in and day out against the Israeli regime, the apartheid Israeli regime, but still, they do not exemplify Palestinian resistance in their entirety. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Rais and then David and then Daniel. Rais? If you can unmute, Rice. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to begin by noting like the sanctimoniousness of Rami, given the fact that the Israeli regime routinely murders children and it's entirely dismissed. Of course, everything that Israel does in the eyes of, the Zionists and the supporters of the state of Israel is justified by some security concern. And ultimately, if we are to have a discussion about peace, then it must be recognized that there is no peace that isn't a just peace, that only a just peace is sustainable. Dr. King conceptualized it like this, that there's a difference between a negative peace, which is the absence of discourse, and the positive peace, which is the presence of justice. For as long as there's no justice in the region, any ceasefire, any peace will fall apart because of the fact that there is an apartheid system that is being implemented upon the Palestinians, because of the fact that there is factually an occupation, despite no matter how many times you want to say the words fake news, despite the fact that because of the fact that there is the blockade of Gaza, the occupation of Palestinian land, the apartheid regime that being implemented, the prevention of the refugees from returning and becoming, it says a lot about the character of the state of Israel, that what Professor Farid Esack said earlier about it being a society with no ethnic or national chauvinism, one person, one vote. If you see that as a threat to your state, then it says a lot about your state. It says a lot about when you decide to have ethnic preconditions on your democracy, it ceases to be a democracy. And this is ultimately where, the impasse can only be overcome if we let go of delusions of two-state solutions and understand that the future that is required is, the solution that is required is a simple one. What obstructs it and what complicates it on purpose is the Israeli regime and the supporters of the state of Israel wanting to maintain domination and supremacy over the Palestinian people upon their own land. And for as long as that persists, there will be no peace.
Rice, thank you very much indeed. David, and then Daniel. David, to you first.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
First, I'd like to say that I don't believe in playing trauma Olympics or that we need to have a moral bingo competition. My heart breaks for everyone involved in this conflict. This is a humanitarian crisis. With that being said, we cannot ignore the facts. And the facts are Hamas attacked Israel first. They went in to many kibbutzim. They killed, tormented, raped women, men, and children. These weren't IDF soldiers they targeted. These were civilians. That is a war crime just as much as anything else is. And when we want to bring up the UN, under the UN and under international law, any country who is attacked has the right to defend themselves. This is self-defense from the side of Israel. Any other country would do the same. To say otherwise is a double standard.
All right, David, thank you very much indeed. Daniel, last word to you.
Hi, I'm audible.
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead, Daniel.
So I'd also just like to point to the fact, again, there's the claims of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the Gaza Strip, and of course there's no denying the situation is obviously not ideal. But I do believe that the minister in charge of the administration of water, electricity and fuel to the Gaza Strip made it very clear that if the 126 hostages that were returned alive, they would get fuel, water and electricity back. Instead, the Hamas leaders, the Hamas extremists in Gaza have decided to keep those hostages, who are not all soldiers, who are some internationals, children, men, women, who are stolen and taken from their homes. Instead of looking after their own people first and foremost, they've decided to keep those hostages and put their own people at risk. I think then to solely point the finger at Israel and say that they are the cause for the humanitarian crisis is not only unguarded, but it is hypocritical. I think we have to look at this from both sides and all sides, and to, again, lay the blame solely on Israel is simply not fair.
Daniel, thank you very much indeed. Time is never on our side, but Monica, I just want to maybe give you the last word with regards to the humanitarian crisis and having to deal with all of this. You heard what Dr. Sooliman says, that employ more just in case you lose people on the ground. Talk to us about the risks that you're currently facing there and how you're going to overcome it in the next couple of days.
Our teams have been seeing a lot of bombardment going on everywhere within the Gaza Strip, within the enclave. So there's risk to human life, to humanitarians trying to do their job, trying to reach patients, to communities that are living there, which we're imploring the international community to find a way to create safe humanitarian spaces where patients can flee to, where doctors can meet with those patients, where medical supplies can come through. We need this to be done immediately.
Thank you very much to all my guests. We're never going to solve this in an hour, right? But I think it's good fertile ground in order to get the discussions going, to air views, and to get to that better place that we all seek. So thank you very much to my guests and also to the digital audience. All right, before we go, here's my take. This conflict is shaping up to be a real test for humanity. Lasting and durable peace, keywords. It's one of the world's longest running conflicts with no end in sight. I wouldn't dare proffer a solution. Many have tried, many have failed. So how do you constructively advance the peace agenda? How do we change the zero-sum game in which whatever is gained by one side is lost by the other? These are questions we have to ask ourselves, not only in the context of the Israel-Hamas conflict, but in the context of humanity and in the furtherance of a better life for all during our limited time here on Earth. And that's my take. If you miss anything, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube, a special edition of Sports Live up next as we build up to the big match, Springboks taking on France. Stick around, you don't want to miss that show. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.